This afternoon, we have departed from our traditional annual meeting keynote, and we're going to a little something different rather than a elected official. Telling agricultural stories is vital in today's world. As the general public gets further and further away from the farm, their understanding of agriculture grows smaller and smaller. Our keynote speaker today is Trent Loos, a man who makes his living telling folks about the importance of agriculture. Trent produces and sends his radio programs from wherever his travels take him using his laptop, computer, and the internet. He presently has a radio listening audience of about 4 million people, and he can be heard on more than 100 stations across the nation. Trent frequently can be found addressing agriculture and non-agriculture groups alike. Among his favorite audiences are our nation's youth, where he takes the opportunity to talk with them about the importance of food as a matter of national security and the value of their involvement in today's food production system. He and his wife, Kelly, operate a purebred limousine and Angus herd. They enjoy working cattle, training horses, and raising their 3 daughters on their ranch in central Nebraska. Let's give a warm Farm Bureau welcome to Trent Loos.
Thank you, David. I'm told this is on. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right. I can't see you, but I think you're out there. What a pleasure it is for me to be back in Mississippi, and perfect timing to follow our recognition of ag ambassadors, because it is high time that all of us learn to be better ag ambassadors. And I came in yesterday and I had the great opportunity to spend time with the young farmers and ranchers last night, and really issued a challenge. And really, I know that every one of us sit back and we identify the disconnect that exists between food producers and food consumers. But then it somehow follows up with, well, I'm a member of Farm Bureau and I got David Wade out there doing it, so I really don't need to. He'll take care of it, and all of the wonderful staff. And really, the answer to the question in expressing what it is that sign says, the voice of Mississippi agriculture, is that we all accept some level of responsibility in explaining the culture of farming and what it means to not only those of us in agriculture, but 310 million Americans, and ultimately 9.2 billion people in the world in 2050, according to the United Nations. 10 years ago, I decided that we needed to do a better job of telling the story, and it happened because I was actually ranching in western South Dakota at the time, and a guy by the name of James Cromwell came into western South Dakota, and he was talking. He had a group of 300 people that were listening to him, and he was talking about the day that he was riding his Harley Davidson on Highway 54 through southwest Kansas into Oklahoma. And if you've been in that country, it is a livestock agricultural paradise. Well, that's not exactly how he phrased it, because he was talking about riding his Harley Davidson, and he said the stink and the smell from the hog and cattle factories was so bad he had to turn around and go the other way. And then he said, and I've decided right then and there that I was going to do whatever it takes to put animal agriculture out of this country. Now, first of all, I found it somewhat ironic that a guy's talking about chasing hog and cattle production from the country while he's riding a Harley Davidson, something that we consider to be a hog. But I also realized that he is going to tell that story every single day. And unless someone who has hands-on experience starts explaining why it is that we need, in particular, animal agriculture, they're going to begin to believe him. So I found a way. I actually just walked into, 1 week later, I walked into a guy's radio studio in Spearfish, South Dakota. I walked in, I said, "Hi, my name is Trent Loos, 6th generation United States farmer, and I want my own radio show." And this was in May of 2000. Jim Thompson looked at me and he said, "Yeah, you and every other American." And then I sat down. He said, "You're serious?" I said, "In fact, sir, I'm not leaving until we get a deal." And long story short, 6 months later, we began producing a radio program together, and then I began producing Loos Tales. And I think that there's an interesting story in this for all of us. Loos Tales, as I began this program, was a daily look at production agriculture. And after 2 years traveling the country, every time I'd drive past a radio station, I'd pull in, I'd go in and introduce myself. Hi, my name is Trent Loos, sixth generation United States farmer, and I produce this radio show called Loos Tales, where I tell the story of production agriculture. And after 2 years of doing that, I had about 12, mostly AM farm radio stations telling the story. Now, what's the problem with that scenario? Did it sound like a rhetorical question? Preaching to the choir. And the choir is too quiet, but yet we've got to get beyond the choir. And then I accidentally did a tremendous thing. I was in Washington, D.C., had a meeting with a guy by the name of John Doyle, the Center for Consumer Freedom, and we were talking, and I said, well, I'm going to go down to NPR when we get done here and talk to them about getting on the radio. John Doyle looked at me and he said, well, do you have an appointment? I said, a what? He said, well, you can't get through that iron curtain without an appointment. I said, obviously, sir, you don't understand the power of a black hat. Well, what happened was I had a sit-down meeting with the program director for NPR, and I told her the same story. My name's Trent Loos, sixth generation United States farmer from Nebraska, living in South Dakota at the time. And I produce this daily radio program called Loos Tales, where I tell the story of production agriculture. And the lady looked me right in the eye and she said, sir, we can't talk about agriculture on NPR. It's boring. Apparently there's 2 people in the back that listen to NPR. And I came home thinking, agriculture is boring. The essentials of life, the conversion of natural resources into human consumable products that enables mankind comes from agriculture. I can sit here with a lady who's in charge of national programming for NPR, and she can tell me that agriculture is boring. And the next time that I walked into a radio station, I remember it clearly, it was Omaha, Nebraska. It was a classic country FM station. I walked in. I said, hi, my name is Trent Loos, sixth generation United States farmer. I produce this radio program called Loos Tales, where I identify the people and places in rural America that truly make it what it is. Oh, you mean like a cowboy Charles Kuralt? Yeah. And 8 years later, you can hear Loos Tales in 19 states on 100 stations because I learned how to position what it is that we do in a way that people think they are involved in. And I think to a large degree that the challenge that we have is that we want to come up here and we want to tell the story of agriculture, but we always start with, I'm an 8th generation farm, and, you know, like my new friend Glenn, whose family's had Missouri Foxtrotters on the same place since 1895, the oldest place. And that's the history and heritage that we want everybody to understand. And the sad truth is that the average soccer mom in this country doesn't care about our history and heritage. What they care is about what we do today that improves their family and their kids. And that is how we have to begin to tell the story in a way that they can relate to and that they can understand. You know, I just about got held up here because Gary King cornered me back there and wanted to know who I was, where I was from. I don't know what he was selling yet. I'm sure I'll find out later. But the most common question that I get, just like Gary asked, how big can your ranch actually be if you're never there? Because I mean, do you know how you know you've been gone too much, too many nights in a hotel room? You come home and instead of turning the faucet on, you stick your hand under there and you expect it to just automatically come on. You know, then you know you've been in a hotel too much. I spend about 200 nights each year in a hotel for the last 2 years. This year, again, had the opportunity to speak in 38 states, 14 times in the state of California. When you ask me, it's a fair question to ask me how big my operation can actually be, and it's time that I just fess up and let everybody know it's just as big as my wife can handle, which is why I ask people from now on just to call me the rancher's husband, because it's a lot more accurate in this description. But we do have 150 beef cows. We've got 25 sows. We've got about 50 horses and 70 or so meat goats, unless they've irritated Kelly since I left home and she had another liquidation, which happened 2 weeks ago. But anyway, you know, as we all now, and I wanted to say something, We're all concerned about the disconnect and the lack of understanding food production in the United States. And in the second week of October, I was in Lexington, Kentucky for a meeting. It happened to be an All-Tech Global Beef and Dairy Summit. 60 countries present. And guess what the number one concern in South Korea is? Guess what the number one concern in Argentina is? In China. All the people that were there, their number one concern is the people who we feed don't know who we are. It's not unique to Mississippi. It's not unique to the United States. It's a global issue. And that is not, by the way, the consumer's fault. It's our fault. Because as my story that I intentionally shared with you about explaining how we capture the attention is because we're very poor at telling a story in a language that the non-farm person can even understand. And I learned this the hard way the other day in the Detroit airport. Because as I told you, I'm a rancher's husband, and we had been kidding goats at the house for about 2 weeks, a couple of months ago, in August actually. And the last thing that I do every time when I get on a plane or I'm in the airport is call home and check with Kelly to see how things are going. And like I said, we'd been kidding goats, so I sat down in my seat on the plane and I said, "Honey, did we have any more kids today?" Another set of triplets? Well, needless to say, when I hung up the phone, the lady sitting next to me wasn't very excited about my wife being home having triplets, and here I am in the Detroit airport. You know, and I started thinking about all of the things that we say on a daily basis in agriculture, and there's no way that people outside of our small community would even begin to understand what we're talking about. And I'm a pretty slow learner, because the other day I made the same mistake. I was in Chicago O'Hare. I told you we've got 25 sows. We're doing quite a bit of artificial insemination, and before I left that week, I had weaned 3 sows. I had them in a pen next to the boar. Kelly just needed to heat check them. Semen's in the basement, and she breeds them. I'm standing in the middle of Chicago O'Hare, and she's telling me that really they're not in good standing heat, and I just blurted out. I said, "Well, I wouldn't waste the semen on them." And I began looking around, and I thought TSA was going to cart me out of this place because they got some wacko over here. And you and I know, and I started thinking about this, all of the things that you and I say, particularly if you're in the livestock sector, that people are wondering, what's wrong with you? Things like, "I knew we should have castrated those guys last week." Well, just call the doc and we'll get him semen tested. You know, I share the enthusiasm of the mule-headed farmer pen because I do raise a few mules each year. We've got 3 donkeys on the place at all times. It's not uncommon for me to be in the Chicago O'Hare Airport or Denver International and say, "Honey, did you see my ass today?" They don't get it. Well, did you at least milk her out? You know, all of those things that you know. Oh, my goodness. And then last June, I was speaking at the Northwest Poultry Festival in Jones, Arkansas. Not in Jones, Rogers, Arkansas. And I'm sitting in the audience thinking, thank God I'm not a chicken breeder. I'd be there in the airport saying, "Well, we've been breeding them to have larger breasts, bigger thighs, and plumper legs."